Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. The Senate chamber fell into a stunned silence. The sharp crack of energy reverberated off the polished marble walls, lingering in the air like an unspoken accusation. Clara West, the human ambassador who had bravely stood before the most powerful empire in the galaxy, was no more. Her body lay motionless, crumpled on the cold floor of the Imperial Senate Hall. A faint smell of burnt ozone hung in the air where the energy beam had struck her chest. For a long moment no one moved. The representatives of the various galactic species, who had been watching the tense proceedings, sat frozen in their seats. The reality of what had just transpired took time to sink in. But when it did, a murmur began to ripple through the chamber, as the realization spread that the Empire's brutal action had shifted the balance of power in an irreversible way. Valzer stood over Clara's fallen form, his tall, imposing figure a perfect contrast to the delicate, lifeless human body at his feet. His voice was a cold, measured baritone as he addressed the assembly. "The fate of your kind was sealed the moment you decided to challenge us," he intoned, his eyes sweeping over the other ambassadors. "Do not mistake this as a mere act of violence. It is a lesson in power, a lesson in humility." A few nervous whispers ran through the crowd, but they fell silent at the piercing gaze Valzer cast over them. The Empire's authority was absolute, and those who dared question it would face swift, brutal retribution. He raised his hand, signaling for the guards to remove Clara's body. As the guards began to drag her away, a voice rang out from the back of the chamber. "Enough!" It was Ambassador Rylak of the Zilthian race, a tall, thin being whose gray skin shimmered with an almost ethereal light. His species had long prided itself on its neutrality in galactic matters, often serving as mediators in disputes. But Rylak, who had watched the rise of the Empire's cruelty with increasing distaste, now spoke out. "This is not justice, Valzer," Rylak said, his voice trembling slightly with suppressed anger. "This is murder, a betrayal of everything this Senate was supposed to stand for." Valzer's expression darkened. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his presence overwhelming. "You are mistaken, Ambassador," he said, his voice almost a whisper, though it echoed throughout the hall. "This Senate was never meant to serve as a council of equals. It was meant to maintain the order of the galaxy under Imperial rule. The human ambassador was an inconvenience, and now she is no more. There will be no more discussion, but the damage had already been done. The act was too brazen, too public. For the first time in centuries, the Empire's ruthlessness had drawn the attention of not only the humans but also the other species who had silently lived under Imperial domination. Fear had always kept them in line, but there was a flicker of something else now, something far more dangerous. A deep, unsettling shift had occurred. As the Senate session dissolved in chaos, back on Earth, a different kind of storm was brewing. News of Clara's assassination spread across every media outlet, across every city, every colony, every human outpost. It was broadcast live to millions. The first footage to reach Earth was grainy, shaky, and incomplete, but it was enough. The sight of the ambassador's lifeless body on the Senate floor ignited a firestorm of rage and disbelief. In the Humanitarian Council, President Eleanor Quinn sat in the war room, her face grim as she watched the broadcast on a massive holographic display. Around her, the leaders of Earth's military and political factions stood in silence, but each could feel the urgency in the air. Clara's death was no longer just a tragedy. It was a direct challenge to the sovereignty of humanity. A declaration of war. "Do we have confirmation of the details?" President Quinn asked, her voice steady but laced with fury. General Marcus Kane, a seasoned military leader who had served at the front lines in humanity's recent skirmishes with Imperial outposts, nodded. "Yes, ma'am. We've intercepted Imperial transmissions. The assassination was carried out by Valzer himself. The message is clear. They want us to bend the knee." "What's our response?" Quinn asked, her eyes hardening. "We have no choice," Kane said, his tone resolute. "We retaliate. We've built up the fleet, but it's time to see if we can use it." It's time to show them that humans do not kneel. A tense silence followed, as the weight of the decision settled over them. War was a terrible thing, but the Council knew the Empire's might would not simply fade away. Humanity had never been content to be passive observers of galactic politics. They had taken their first steps among the stars only a few decades ago, and now those steps had led to a deadly confrontation. "Prepare the fleet," Quinn ordered, her voice like steel. "Launch an immediate strike on Imperial-controlled territories. Make them understand that humanity will not be cowed." The room buzzed with activity as military leaders began issuing orders, activating the human fleet's readiness protocols. Within moments, ships were being deployed, jump gates opening across the solar system, ready to send humanity's wrath to the heart of the Empire. Across the galaxy, the first signs of the human response began to materialize. Ships from Earth's colonies, outfitted with newly developed weapons and technologies, began to assemble near the Imperial borders. The human fleet, a mixture of gleaming warships and rugged, improvised vessels, formed a battle group unlike anything the Empire had faced before. It was a fleet built for vengeance. In the control room of the Repulse, humanity's flagship, Captain Marcus Kane stared at the star chart, his fingers hovering over the command interface. "This is it," he muttered. "For Clara. For Earth." As the ships prepared to jump into Imperial space, the gravity of the moment hit. They were about to wage a war they had never anticipated. A war for survival, for their place in the galaxy. And they would make the Empire feel the cost of crossing humanity. With a single command, the fleet leapt into the unknown, ready to make their mark on history. The vastness of space felt different after the death of Clara West. For the first time in humanity's brief yet explosive journey among the stars, they were not just an emerging species. They were an unstoppable force. Earth's fleet, built for retaliation and survival, began its preparations to strike back. Every man, woman, and child on Earth watched in somber unity, their grief giving birth to a collective rage. The message was clear. The murder of Clara was an act that would not go unanswered. President Eleanor Quinn stood in her office, gazing out the window of the Terran presidential complex at the sprawling city below. It was dawn, and the streets were still dark, save for the distant lights of military vehicles and communication drones. The city was on edge, as if the very air had become charged with the inevitability of war. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sharp chime of her communication terminal. She turned, and the holographic image of General Marcus Kane appeared before her. "Ma'am, the fleet is ready," Kane said, his face etched with determination. Behind him, the towering form of the Repulse, Earth's flagship, loomed in the background, a steel behemoth prepared for the battle ahead. "We've confirmed all systems. We're waiting on your orders." Quinn nodded slowly, a deep sense of resolve in her eyes. "Do it, Marcus. Strike now. The Empire has made its move, and we will make ours." The transmission ended, and Quinn stood still for a moment, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. She knew that this would be the defining moment of her presidency, and humanity's place in the galaxy would be determined by the outcome. The response was no longer just about vengeance for Clara. It was about showing the galaxy what humanity was capable of. The human fleet, led by the Repulse, exited Earth's orbit at near-light speed, slicing through the darkness of space. It was a coordinated operation with hundreds of ships, ranging from large battleships to small, agile strike cruisers, aligning in a massive formation. Each ship had been outfitted with the latest hybrid technology, human innovation combined with stolen Imperial designs. Their ships were faster, more efficient, and more maneuverable than the Empire's sluggish capital vessels. But it wasn't just the technology that set the human fleet apart. It was their sheer willpower. The Federation's military was composed of thousands of soldiers, many of whom had only recently left the relative safety of Earth and its colonies. They had been trained in a culture of persistence and resourcefulness. They weren't just soldiers. They were the inheritors of a spirit that had conquered Earth itself. As the fleet entered Imperial space, their first move was strategic. They targeted the Empire's outlying military stations and supply depots, vulnerable, underguarded facilities that were critical to the Empire's war effort. It wasn't about attacking a massive enemy fleet head-on. That would be suicide. Instead, the humans used their agility and intelligence to strike fast and hard, hitting weak points in the Empire's chain of command. The first Imperial response came quickly. An alert sounded throughout the Imperial Command Center, causing a ripple of panic. The Empire's defenses, designed to deter raiders and pirates, were no match for the precision of the human assault. Within hours, several supply stations were reduced to floating debris, their energy cores ignited by the intense firepower of the human ships. The Empire's reaction was swift but overly confident. An entire fleet was dispatched to counter the human strike. Valzer, the High Chancellor of the Empire, watched from his command throne. His glowing eyes narrowed in displeasure as he observed the human fleet's movements. He had underestimated them, he knew that now. They dare strike at us in such a disorganized fashion? Valzer hissed, his voice filled with both disbelief and simmering anger. Their persistence may be commendable, but they are still ants before us. He waved his hand, and his subordinates scrambled to launch their counterattack. The Dreadspire, the Empire's flagship, a massive, planet-destroying weapon, was ready for deployment. It was an ancient vessel, its technology centuries ahead of anything the humans had, capable of destroying entire fleets with a single salvo. But Valzer, arrogant in his belief that the Empire could never be challenged, did not realize how deeply the humans had provoked something within the collective psyche of their people. What had begun as a response to the murder of Clara West was evolving into something far more dangerous for the Empire: the rise of human ingenuity, adaptability, and defiance. Back on Earth, the population watched every moment unfold in real time, their eyes glued to the hollow ports that broadcasted the conflict. For many, the war felt distant yet personal. The images of Clara's final moments had stirred a deep sense of injustice, and with each victory won by the human fleet, the sense of unity grew stronger. In a war room on Earth, President Quinn sat with her top advisors as the battle progressed. On the large screen in front of her, real-time data displayed the results of humanity's first strikes. It was working. The Imperial defenses were buckling, their arrogance exposed for the galaxy to see. "Initial reports are in, ma'am," said Admiral Yanis, her chief strategist. "We've hit them hard, and their outer defenses are in disarray. But they're sending a response fleet. It's large and moving fast. We'll need to be prepared for a full-scale engagement." Quinn nodded. "Prepare for it. We're not retreating. This fight is about showing the galaxy what happens when you underestimate humanity. We will not back down." The war had just begun, but humanity had already proven that they would not be crushed under the heel of the Empire. Their first steps in this galactic war were like the first steps of a child learning to walk, uncertain, but filled with the determination to survive. As the days passed, the Empire realized that this was no mere rebellion, no small resistance force to be snuffed out. The humans, for all their youth, were clever. They had no grand fleet of warships like the Empire, but they had something far more dangerous: an unyielding will to survive and the determination to fight for their place in the galaxy. By the end of the week, the first major battle had been fought and humanity had proven its worth. The Imperial fleet, though larger and more advanced, was battered and disorganized. Several of their warships had been disabled, and the humans had sent a clear message: they were not to be trifled with. The Dreadspire, still a few days away from deployment, now stood as a symbol of the Empire's desperation. The Empire had tried to remind humanity of its power, but it was humanity's response that had reverberated across the galaxy. It was not just a retaliation for Clara West. It was the birth of a new era in galactic politics, and the Empire was about to learn that humanity was not so easily broken. The night sky of Earth was filled with news broadcasts and military transmissions. Across the planet, people held their breath as the battle in space escalated. The first waves of humanity's retaliation had landed hard against the Empire's outposts, sending shockwaves through Imperial-controlled systems. The fleet, composed of human ships outfitted with hybrid technology, had successfully crippled key Imperial installations. In the dark recesses of space, humanity had taken its first steps in what would become a brutal, drawn-out war. However, victory on the fringes meant little if the heart of the Empire remained unchallenged. As the Federation's fleet continued to press forward, the Empire responded with predictable might, dispatching an enormous response fleet to reclaim control. The war was no longer just a series of skirmishes. It had become a full-scale conflict that threatened to reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The Repulse, Earth's flagship and the center of the human fleet, cut through space like a blade, its engines humming with power. Captain Marcus Kane stood on the bridge, his eyes focused on the star map before him. His tactical officers were busily coordinating the movements of the fleet, calculating jump points and preparing weapon systems for the approaching Imperial fleet. "We have confirmed that their fleet is on its way," Lieutenant Tessa Velos reported from her station. "They've gathered everything they have. We'll be facing the full force of the Empire in the next 3 hours." Kane's jaw tightened. "What's the current status of our forces?" "Most of our ships are on the move, but we're still waiting for reinforcements from the outer colonies. We'll be outnumbered at the onset of the battle, but our ships are faster and more flexible than theirs." "I know," Kane muttered. "We have the advantage in maneuverability, but that won't be enough if they deploy their Dreadspire." The Dreadspire, the Empire's planet-destroying flagship, was their greatest weapon. A ship capable of wiping entire battle groups from existence with a single pulse from its devastating weapon. If the Empire deployed the Dreadspire against the humans, the Federation's fleet would face annihilation. A heavy silence hung over the bridge. The Repulse was not just a ship. It was a symbol, a beacon of humanity's defiance. Captain Kane understood the stakes. If they could hold their ground long enough to call in reinforcements, they might just have a chance. But if the Dreadspire arrived first, it could be all over before the rest of the fleet had a chance to join the fight. The two fleets met near the edge of Imperial space, their ships forming up like titans facing each other across a vast chasm of stars. On one side, humanity's fleet, brimming with raw energy, innovation, and sheer will, faced down the Empire's battle-hardened armada, a machine of war more than 1,000 years old. The Empire's ships were enormous, their hulls reinforced with materials beyond anything humanity had seen. But humanity's fleet, though outmatched in size, was fast, unpredictable, and fiercely determined. As the first exchange of fire broke the silence of space, the two sides collided in a fiery maelstrom. The Empire unleashed its full fury, their plasma turrets and energy beams lancing out toward the human ships. The humans, in turn, maneuvered with precision, their ships darting between the larger Imperial vessels like flies avoiding swats from a monstrous predator. The Imperial fleet was slow to react, as their massive vessels struggled to track the smaller, faster human ships. But despite the speed and agility of the human fleet, the Empire's firepower was overwhelming. The first few waves of Imperial blasts tore through the outer edges of the human formation, forcing the human ships to scatter. On the Repulse, Captain Kane gripped the armrests of his command chair as the ship rocked under the intensity of the blasts. His eyes locked onto the view screen, where the enemy fleet loomed like a tidal wave of destruction. "We're taking heavy hits," shouted Lieutenant Velos, her voice strained. "Shields at 70% and dropping. We need to break through their front lines before they can concentrate fire on us." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Divert all power to forward shields and give me a direct line to Fleet Command. I want reinforcements here, now." As the Repulse pushed forward, the battle grew more intense. Energy bolts from the Empire's ships slashed through the darkness, but the human fleet's tactics were paying off. Using their smaller, more nimble ships, they created diversions and flanked the Imperial forces, attacking from angles that the Empire's slow, lumbering ships could barely respond to. "All forward batteries ready," Kane called out. "Fire at will." The Repulse unleashed its own barrage, a volley of precise, concentrated shots that tore through the hull of an Imperial cruiser. The ship cracked and split apart, its debris tumbling into the void. The battle continued for hours, the exchange of fire growing ever more chaotic. But then, as the human fleet pushed deeper into Imperial space, the dreaded silhouette of the Dreadspire appeared on the edge of the battlefield. The massive ship loomed like a shadow over the combatants, its sleek, terrifying design dwarfing all other ships around it. Kane's heart sank. There it was, the Empire's answer to everything. The Dreadspire was an ancient warship, older than even the Empire itself, capable of decimating entire fleets with its devastating energy weapon. "It's here," Kane muttered. "Everyone, fall back. We need to regroup, we can't take that thing head-on." But the Empire wasn't simply aiming for the repulse. The Dreadspire's weapon was capable of obliterating entire groups of ships at once. It was designed to wipe the battlefield clean. Before Kane could issue another command, the Dreadspire fired. A burst of bright, white energy erupted from its center, stretching out like the sun itself, and a portion of the human fleet disintegrated in an instant. Ships that had once gleamed with the promise of humanity's defiance were now reduced to glowing embers, their hulks floating lifelessly in space. The toll was devastating, but it was not enough to break the human spirit. Kane looked to the tactical map, his expression grim but resolute. "Not today," he whispered to himself. As the Dreadspire powered up for another shot, a new signal flashed on Kane's screen. Reinforcements had arrived. "Fleet Command has come through. All ships, regroup and prepare for the second wave." "We're not done yet." With the help of their reinforcements, humanity's forces rallied. The Empire had made a critical mistake in deploying the Dreadspire too early. Humanity had anticipated this and had been preparing countermeasures. Their ability to adapt under pressure had been their greatest strength. Now, with reinforcements on the way, the tide of the battle began to shift. The first strike of humanity's war against the Empire was far from over, but it was clear that the fight was only beginning. And if the Empire thought that the human spirit could be crushed by a single blast, they were about to learn a brutal lesson in resilience. The remnants of the human fleet drifted in the cold void of space, battered and scarred from their encounter with the Empire's formidable Dreadspire. The attack had cost them dearly. Several ships had been destroyed, and many others were heavily damaged. Yet the human resolve remained unbroken. The Empire had delivered a crushing blow, but humanity's tenacity had proven that they would not be crushed so easily. On board the Repulse, the mood was somber as Captain Marcus Kane stood in the war room, his eyes tracing the damage reports flashing across the screens. The Dreadspire had done its worst, but humanity had fought back with ferocity. The rest of the fleet, though battered, had retreated into the safety of nearby asteroid fields, regrouping and repairing. "Casualty reports are coming in," Lieutenant Tessavello said, her voice heavy with concern. "The Falcon's Fury took a direct hit. We've lost contact with the Stalwart. We're also seeing damage to several of our fast-response ships, but nothing we can't recover from." Kane let out a deep breath, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was always the unknowns that were the hardest to swallow, the ships that went silent, the allies who were unaccounted for. Humanity had made a statement that day, but at a steep cost. "Have we received word from Fleet Command?" Kane asked, turning his focus back to the situation at hand. Velos shook her head. "They're still calculating the full extent of the damage, but we should expect a response soon. They're working to mobilize reinforcements from the outer colonies." Kane glanced at the tactical map hovering above the conference table. The Imperial fleet had momentarily withdrawn after their first victory, but the shadows of their power were far from gone. The Dreadspire had struck hard, and the Empire would soon return in full force, eager to extinguish the fire that humanity had started. But Kane had no intention of letting that happen. He knew the importance of the coming days. The humans had shown the galaxy that they would fight back, but they needed to press that advantage while they still had momentum. "We don't have the luxury of waiting," Kane said, his voice firm. "Prepare our remaining ships for a counterstrike. The Empire might think we've been broken, but we will not let them dictate this war. We need to show them that the cost of underestimating humanity is more than they're willing to pay." Across the galaxy, the Empire was in turmoil. The sudden and unexpected ferocity of the human resistance had thrown their careful plans into disarray. The Galactic Emperor, who had ruled over countless species for centuries, had received word of the failure of the Dreadspire's assault. His advisors had warned him of the unpredictability of the humans, but he had never anticipated the level of defiance they displayed. The humans are not like the other species we've subdued, one of his advisors said in a nervous tone. They are resilient, fighting against us at every turn. The Emperor's throne room was cold and silent as he stared out over his domain. His fingers steepled in thought. They've dared to challenge us, but they will learn that resistance is futile, he said, his voice icy and filled with confidence. Deploy the full might of the fleet. It is time to finish what we began. His advisor hesitated. Your Excellency, the Dreadspire was not enough. They have regrouped. Perhaps we should consider alternative strategies. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, cutting the advisor's words short. There is no alternative. The humans have not earned the privilege of negotiation. We will crush them. Leave nothing behind but ash. Humanity's resolve, however, was far from waning. Across the Federation, as Earth's colonies recovered from the initial shock of the Empire's attack, a wave of solidarity spread. The call to arms was answered not just by the military, but by civilians, engineers, and scientists eager to contribute to the war effort. Humanity's ingenuity had always been one of its defining traits, and now it was being channeled into a singular goal: victory. In the aftermath of the initial skirmishes, a network of human intelligence officers, codenamed the Network, had gathered crucial data on the Empire's weaknesses. The Empire's reliance on brute force had created significant blind spots. The humans had learned to exploit these gaps, using their knowledge of Imperial communication systems and military infrastructure to strike where the Empire was weakest. One such opportunity presented itself in the form of an Imperial supply depot on the remote world of Tar-Ash, a planet that was strategically vital to the Empire's operations. If the humans could capture or destroy the depot, it would cripple the Empire's ability to respond quickly to future assaults. Kane knew this was the moment they had been waiting for. A successful strike on Tar-Ash would not only send a clear message to the Empire, it would give humanity a critical foothold in the war. The mission was risky. The Empire had fortified the planet with a heavily guarded orbital defense grid, and any attempt to strike directly would result in catastrophic losses. But Kane had a plan, a daring, unorthodox plan. He called a meeting of his senior officers aboard the Repulse. We're not going to take the conventional approach, Kane began, his voice filled with determination. We're going to slip past their defenses and hit them where they least expect it. I'm going to lead a small strike force into the heart of the planet's orbit, right past their radar systems. We'll breach their defenses from within, using stealth and subterfuge to disable the depot's power grid. We'll hit them hard, then get out before they can react. Lieutenant Velos raised an eyebrow. That's a dangerous move, sir. If they detect us even a second too early, we'll be sitting ducks. I know the risks, Kane replied. But if we succeed, we cripple their supply lines. And we send them a message they can't ignore. The plan was set into motion within hours. Kane, leading a fleet of 5 ships, all equipped with the latest cloaking technology, would infiltrate the orbital defenses of Tar-Ash. With an assault team of elite soldiers on board, they would storm the facility, disable its power grid, and escape before the Empire could respond. The hours leading up to the mission were tense. The crew of the Repulse and the other ships had trained for this moment, and they understood that their success or failure would mark the turning point of the war. As the fleet neared Tar-Ash, Kane addressed his crew once more. Whatever happens today, remember this. We fight for humanity, for everyone who has ever suffered under the Empire's rule. If we fail, we won't just be letting ourselves down. We'll be letting down every man, woman, and child who believes in what we're fighting for. With those words, Kane and his fleet slipped into the heart of enemy territory, cloaked and ready for the dangerous mission that lay ahead. The battle for Tar-Ash had begun. The tension in the Repulse's command center was palpable. A dozen officers sat at their stations, their eyes fixed on the holographic displays that flickered with the stark, cold imagery of Tar-Ash-4's moonlit surface and its heavily fortified orbital defense grid. Captain Marcus Kane stood at the helm, his hand resting lightly on the chair's armrest, every muscle in his body taut with the anticipation of what was about to unfold. Approaching target zone, Captain, Lieutenant Tessa Velo said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. We're entering the enemy's radar blind spot. Cloaking systems are operating at full capacity. Kane gave a curt nod. Maintain this course. No mistakes. We're in and out as fast as we can. The moment we lose our advantage, we're finished. The mission to destroy the Imperial Supply Depot on Tarash 4 was humanity's boldest move yet. It wasn't just about crippling the Empire's logistics. It was about showing the galaxy that the Empire's might was no longer an unstoppable force, that humanity could infiltrate their most secure systems and walk away unscathed. The fleet's 5 cloaked ships slowly approached the planet's orbit, moving under the radar, invisible to the sensors of the defense grid above. The depot, located on the planet's dark side, was shielded by an array of heavy turrets and automated drones, designed to detect and destroy any approaching threat. The humans knew that the Empire would expect a direct assault, but that wasn't the plan. Kane had ordered his ships to weave through the asteroid field that surrounded the moon, using the natural debris as cover to slip past the bulk of the Empire's defenses. They would make their way in close, infiltrate the depot from within, and disable the power grid. It was a risky operation, but if they succeeded, it would buy them the time they needed to deal a fatal blow to the Empire's war machine. Aboard the Repulse, Lieutenant Velos monitored the ship systems as they passed deeper into the defense grid's radius. The cloaking device worked flawlessly, and the ship's engines were muted to near silence. Despite the calm on the surface, the heart of the crew beat faster with each passing second. It would only take a single detection, a single miscalculation, to turn this into a suicide mission. We've entered the planet's shadow, Velos reported. We're within range of the depot sensors. Kane turned to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Torin. Initiate Phase 1. Let's disable their external communications. A soft hum filled the command room as Torin worked quickly, coordinating with the rest of the fleet. The cloaked ships moved into position around the depot, with each vessel carefully taking up a key position in the planetary orbit. The rest of the fleet would remain just out of range, watching for any signs of movement from the Empire's ships or orbital defense platforms. Then, like a shadow from the void, the strike team descended on their target. Kane's flagship, the Repulse, was the first to make its move. As the ship neared the facility, its cloaking device disengaged, and in a burst of speed, it dropped low into the atmosphere, just beneath the depot's perimeter defense grid. The strike team, a highly trained group of Federation Marines, had already boarded the dropships. With military precision, they deployed via dropships, their aim to hit the ground running, taking out enemy patrols before they could alert the Empire's garrisons. The Repulse fired a few quick warning shots at the outer defense platforms, sending them into disarray, but the real action took place on the surface. On the ground, the Federation Marines stormed the Imperial facility. Their mission was clear: disable the power grid, neutralize all personnel, and get out. It was a tight window. Once the alarm went off, there would be no time left. Staff Sergeant James Harrow, a seasoned soldier with countless battles behind him, led the charge. His team breached the facility's main gates with explosive charges, their movements swift and methodical. "Go, go, go!" Harrow shouted as his team surged forward, their weapons raised and scanning for threats. They moved in tight formation, clearing corners and eliminating resistance with ruthless efficiency. The Empire's forces, caught off guard by the sudden assault, scrambled to respond. But the humans had the element of surprise. By the time the alarm systems activated, Harrow and his team had already infiltrated the facility's core, where the power grid was located. They planted explosives on key conduits, ensuring that the grid would go down in a matter of minutes. But even with their success, the enemy wasn't done fighting back. Suddenly, the air was filled with the screech of an incoming missile. "Get down!" Harrow barked, and his team scattered. The blast from the explosion sent a shockwave through the building, knocking several Marines off their feet. Harrow gritted his teeth as the alarms blared, signaling that the Empire's forces had fully mobilized. The Empire had sent reinforcements. Troops from nearby orbital platforms began descending in rapid assault ships, their weapons locked and ready. But Harrow wasn't worried. He had trained for this. His team had trained for this. They had minutes at most before they were overwhelmed. With a grimace, he activated his comms. "This is Harrow. Power grid's gone. Time to get out. Fall back to the dropships. Move, move, move." The Marines swiftly executed their escape plan, retreating through the facility's dark, winding corridors as enemy forces flooded the base. Gunfire rang out, and the clash of battle escalated with every passing second. They had done their job, but now it was about survival. Above the planet, Kane watched the situation unfold through the live feeds from his ship's sensors. The explosives had triggered as planned, sending the power grid into overload, and the entire depot was plunged into darkness. The Empire's communication systems were down, cutting them off from reinforcements. But the battle was far from won. Imperial forces were already regrouping and preparing to launch a counterattack, their own dropships launching from the surface to engage the human team. Kane could see the flashes of gunfire from the surface, and his heart raced as he realized just how close they were to being overwhelmed. "Prepare for extraction," Kane ordered. "Deploy the escape pods. Get our people out of there." As the Marines fought their way back to the extraction point, the cloaked ships in orbit began to fire, disabling enemy ships and creating a temporary safe zone for the retreat. The Repulse's weapons lashed out, picking off the Imperial reinforcements before they could reach the surface. Minutes later, the strike team was on their way back to the fleet, their mission complete, though the cost had been high. They had crippled the Empire's supply lines, but in doing so, they had made their presence known. As the human fleet prepared to retreat into the depths of space, Kane's thoughts were already on the next move. The Empire had been struck hard, but this was just one battle. The war was far from over, and humanity had just proven it could hold its own in the heart of the Empire's territory. With the Empire's defenses crippled and the Federation's resolve stronger than ever, humanity's fight for freedom and justice had only just begun. The days following the assault on Tarash were a blur of tactical planning and rapid redeployment. Captain Marcus Kane and his crew had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, but the victory came with a price. Although the Empire had suffered a significant loss in supply lines and communications, they were not a force to be underestimated. The human fleet had delivered a blow, but the Empire's response was inevitable. Humanity's victory had proven one thing above all: they could fight back against the Empire's might. But the question that loomed over every military strategy session was whether they could sustain this momentum. With the Empire on the defensive, the Federation would need to act quickly, decisively, and with unwavering unity. On the Repulse, Captain Kane stood at the tactical station, staring out into the cold expanse of space. A few yards away, Lieutenant Velos and Lieutenant Torin were in heated discussion, poring over newly decrypted intelligence from the strike on Tarash 4. "The Empire's been quick to regroup," Velos said, her voice tight with concern. "Their response fleet is already on the move. We've thrown them off balance, but they're not out of the game yet." Kane's expression was grim. "They'll come back harder. We can't afford to wait for them to regroup. If we don't act fast, this war could drag on for years." Torin, who had been analyzing the Empire's fleet movements, looked up. "I've been monitoring their communications. They're sending their remaining Dreadspire-class ships to the front. They'll have their heavy hitters back in place before we even know it. We need to take the fight to them before they recover." Kane nodded slowly, his mind racing. The Dreadspire-class ships were the backbone of the Empire's war machine, and if they regained full control of their fleets, the humans would be at an extreme disadvantage. They needed to strike again, while the Empire's fleet was still in disarray. "We need to put the pressure on." "I've got a plan," Kane said firmly, turning to Velos and Torin. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the people of Earth and its colonies were rallying. After the success at Tarash 4, the war had become something more than just a series of military skirmishes. It had become a symbol of resistance. The human spirit had ignited like wildfire, spreading across every system where humans had settled, from the fringe worlds of the Outer Rim to the bustling centers of the inner colonies. People who had lived in fear of the Empire now saw the possibility of a future free from Imperial control. Even those who had been neutral in the conflict were beginning to rally to humanity's cause, seeing that the Empire's stranglehold was not as unbreakable as they had once believed. The Federation was no longer just a defensive alliance. It had become a beacon of hope for countless civilizations under Imperial oppression. At a command station deep within the human fleet's strategic base, General Lena Harrington addressed a room filled with commanders and analysts. She was a tall, battle-hardened woman whose face was marred by years of conflict, but her eyes were sharp and unwavering. The room fell silent as she spoke. The Empire is reeling, but they are not defeated. We need to hit them before they can reassemble. Our objective is clear: strike fast, strike hard. We cannot let them regroup. The gathered officers nodded in agreement, each one understanding the stakes. Every operation, every mission, was now a stepping stone toward the ultimate goal: taking down the Empire. Kane's plan began to take shape. A series of precision strikes at key Imperial strongholds, each designed to disrupt supply lines, sabotage communications, and cripple the Empire's ability to wage war on multiple fronts. The first target would be an Imperial communications relay on a remote moon in the Nebran system. If they could sever the Empire's ability to coordinate their forces, it would buy the humans precious time to regroup and plan their next major offensive. Kane and his crew assembled a task force, one that included a combination of their most elite fighters, as well as specialists who had proven invaluable in the previous skirmishes. The mission would be dangerous. It would take them deep into Imperial territory, but it was essential if they hoped to continue their streak of victories. "Captain, we've prepped the fleet for insertion into the Nebran system," Velos reported. "We've got a tight window to strike before their reinforcements can arrive." "Good," Kane replied, his voice steady despite the storm of anxiety swirling in his chest. "Once we neutralize that relay, we move on to their next supply hub. We'll keep hitting them until they're too scattered to fight back." The human fleet moved swiftly through the darkness of space, its ships cutting through the void like a swarm of locusts. The fleet's cloaking technology ensured their movements remained undetected, but the uncertainty of the mission weighed heavily on everyone involved. The Empire had begun to grow more cautious, deploying more advanced reconnaissance drones and defensive satellites in the wake of the Repulse's last strike. Kane knew it was only a matter of time before the humans encountered stiff resistance. Hours later, in the Nebran system, the human fleet arrived at the communications relay station. The moon, a barren rock with few features of interest, was an ideal location for the Empire to hide such a crucial installation. The fleet hovered just out of range of the relay's detection systems, cloaking devices active, preparing for the strike. "All ships are in position," Lieutenant Torin confirmed. "We'll have a small window to disable their communications array and destroy the facility before the Empire can react. After that, we'll exfiltrate and rendezvous with the fleet." The operation was set into motion. Kane's task force descended on the relay station surface, using a combination of stealth landings and covert infiltration tactics to breach the facility's defenses. The human soldiers, clad in advanced combat armor and equipped with electromagnetic pulse grenades, swiftly neutralized the Empire's automated defense systems and took control of the facility's internal systems. Meanwhile, in the upper atmosphere, the rest of the fleet engaged in a calculated series of distractions, creating false signals to mislead Imperial sensor stations and buying the ground team more time. But despite their precision, the Empire's vigilance was growing, and the humans were not long out of the Empire's radar. "Captain," Velos said, her voice laced with urgency, "we've got incoming reinforcements from the Imperial patrol ships. They've detected the disturbance." "Proceed as planned," Kane ordered. "We're not backing down now." The explosives were planted on the main communications tower, and as the timer counted down, the ground team made their way back to the extraction point. The Empire's reinforcements arrived just as the tower exploded in a shower of sparks and flames, sending a powerful shockwave that disrupted the facility's remaining systems. The strike force retreated to their landing ships, narrowly avoiding enemy gunfire. As the ships rose from the surface, the fleet's cloaked vessels fired upon the incoming Imperial ships, clearing their path to safety. By the time the Empire's forces arrived in full force, the human fleet had already vanished into the void, their mission a success. The communications relay had been destroyed, and the Empire was left scrambling to reestablish control. For the first time in years, it was the Empire that was on the defensive, and the galaxy was beginning to take notice. The war was escalating, and humanity's victories were becoming a beacon for those who had long been under Imperial control. The tide was turning, and humanity's resolve was growing stronger by the day. The Empire would soon realize that their iron grip on the galaxy was not as secure as they thought. The Empire had underestimated humanity. This truth was becoming painfully evident with each passing victory. While the Empire clung to its belief that the universe belonged to them by divine right, the Federation, under the leadership of Captain Marcus Kane, had proven that even the mightiest of tyrants could be defied. With the destruction of the communications relay in the Nebran system, humanity had shattered the Empire's ability to coordinate their forces on a large scale, and the effects of that strike were beginning to ripple across the galaxy. The Imperial response had been swift and brutal. The Dreadspire-class ships were back in action, their immense firepower once again a looming threat to the human fleet. But for the first time, the Empire was fighting on the defensive, scattered and fractured in a way they had never experienced. The Empire's leadership had failed to recognize the full potential of humanity's resilience and adaptability. They believed their power would crush any opposition, but they had underestimated humanity's ability to come together in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Aboard the Repulse, Kane sat in the command center, gazing out at the empty void beyond. The war had escalated to a point of no return. The Empire had been dealt blow after blow, but they still possessed vast resources and military might. Now it was time to push them beyond the brink. We've taken out their communications, disrupted their supply lines, and destroyed key military assets, Lieutenant Velos reported, standing at her station. But the Dreadspire fleet is still operational, and we've got reports of Imperial reinforcements mobilizing. We're running out of time. Kane's face hardened as he considered their next move. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Humanity's attacks had forced the Empire into a reactive position, but the key to winning this war wasn't just about striking their fleet. It was about breaking the Empire's will to continue. They needed to make a final push, an attack that would send the message that the Empire could no longer continue its reign of terror. We're going to do more than just cripple them, Kane said, his voice cold and resolute. We're going to hit them where it hurts the most. At the heart of their power, the target was the Imperial capital, the planet Veritas. It was a fortress world, heavily fortified and protected by an array of Dreadspire-class ships. For centuries, it had been the center of Imperial rule, the place where all of the Emperor's decrees were issued, where the final word of life and death was spoken. Veritas was where the Empire's strength had been forged, and it was also where it would likely die. The Federation's attack on Veritas would be the most dangerous mission of the war. It was a bold gamble, but Kane knew it was their best chance. If they could strike Veritas with enough force and disrupt the heart of the Empire's political and military leadership, the entire structure would collapse. The Empire had relied too heavily on its singular, absolute authority. If that core were shattered, the Empire would have nothing left but hollow shells of power. Kane briefed his senior officers. We hit Veritas with everything we've got. All our ships, all our resources. We destroy their leadership. If we can cripple their command structure, the rest of their forces will collapse in on themselves. Velos raised a hand. Sir, even if we manage to break through their defenses, how do we deal with the Dreadspires? Their firepower is... We won't be facing them head-on, Kane interrupted. We'll use the Empire's own arrogance against them. They'll expect us to come at them full force with our fleet. Instead, we're going to hit Veritas using deception and precision. We'll slip past their defenses, strike the heart of their capital, and vanish before they can retaliate. The plan was daring, reckless, and potentially disastrous. But Kane's confidence in humanity's resilience was unwavering. They had already fought against impossible odds, and they had come out victorious time and again. It was time to put everything they had into one final, decisive strike. As the Federation's fleet made its way to Veritas, the tension was thick. Every ship, from the smallest scout vessel to the largest dreadnought, was preparing for the battle of their lives. The soldiers aboard the Repulse and other vessels knew that this would be a defining moment in history. Success would mean the end of the Empire's reign, but failure would bring swift, brutal retribution. Kane stood on the bridge of the Repulse, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked out at the swarms of enemy ships gathering around Veritas. It was a massive fleet, one of the largest ever assembled. The Empire had learned from previous mistakes and was now focused entirely on preventing a Federation assault. "Sir, they've detected our fleet," Velos said, her voice tense. "We've been spotted. The Dreadspires are moving into position." "Then we move faster," Kane replied, a hint of determination in his voice. "All ships, engage cloaking. Prepare for immediate deployment." The Federation ships activated their cloaking devices, disappearing into the vastness of space like shadows. Kane had already foreseen the Empire's response, and they were ready to exploit it. Veritas was heavily protected, but there were blind spots, gaps in the Empire's defense systems. The Federation would use the same tactics they had perfected over the past months: deception, misdirection, and speed. The ships maneuvered quickly, taking advantage of the terrain of nearby moons and asteroid fields, ducking in and out of the enemy's radar range. The Repulse, along with the rest of the strike force, slipped through the Empire's outer defenses with pinpoint accuracy, bypassing their sensors and weapon systems undetected. As the Federation fleet neared Veritas, the final stage of the operation began. "We've made it through their perimeter," Kane said, a flicker of pride in his voice. "Now we strike." The Federation's forces descended upon Veritas with surgical precision. The Repulse and its allies hit the Imperial capital's political and military centers, taking out key infrastructure and leadership targets. All around them, explosions lit the sky as buildings and fortresses crumbled to the ground. The Empire had never anticipated such an attack. The heart of their power, the very source of their control, was now under siege. Panic rippled through the Imperial ranks as their command structure collapsed in real time. The Dreadspire fleet attempted to regroup, but they were too late. The Empire's supply lines had been severed. Their leadership had been shattered. The Federation forces did not linger. After executing the decisive strikes, they pulled back into the safety of the cosmos, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of an empire on the verge of collapse. Veritas had been struck, a blow so devastating that it reverberated across the entire galaxy. The next few weeks were a blur of communications, intelligence gathering, and rebuilding. As the dust settled, it became clear that the Empire, as it had once been known, was no more. Without its leadership, its unity fractured, its forces scattered, and its economy in shambles, the Empire had fallen. Humanity had won. The galaxy had witnessed an extraordinary transformation. What had once seemed like an insurmountable enemy had been driven into retreat by the determination, courage, and resilience of a single species, humanity. The Federation had proven that they were not just a footnote in the galaxy's history. They had become its greatest hope. Captain Kane stood at the helm of the Repulse, gazing out at the stars, now free from the Empire's grip. He knew there would be challenges ahead. Peace would not come easily. But for the first time in generations, the galaxy felt like it could breathe again. Humanity had claimed its place, not just as survivors, but as victors. And the galaxy would never forget the day it learned what happened when humans fought for their freedom. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.